Hello and welcome to On Work and Revolution, where we talk about what's shaking up in the world of work and education. I'm Debbie Goodman, your host, and today we have as our guest Denis Nikolaev, who is head of EdTech investments at Prosus, one of the largest technology investors in the world. And whilst you may not necessarily be familiar with the Prosus brand, if you're in any way connected to the EdTech world, you'll definitely have heard of the companies in their EdTech portfolio, certainly. In fact, Denis's EdTech team has invested over $3.5 billion in a portfolio of 12 companies globally, including Stack Overflow, Udemy, GoStudent, Byju's, amongst others. You'll definitely have heard of some of those. Prior to his time at Prosus, Denis worked as an investment banker at Citigroup in London, where he helped establish the internet investment banking team there. He has a bachelor's in economics from the LSE, London School of Economics, and political science and a master's degree from said business school at the University of Oxford. Very well educated fellow. And today we're going to talk to Denis about what's going on in the post-pandemic world of EdTech investments. How the recent spate of AI tools like ChatGPT and Bard are going to impact the sector, as well as hear his take on new interesting areas of innovation in the EdTech landscape. So listen up and welcome, Denis.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, but first I've got a career question. I follow the arc of people's careers, and I'm really curious to know how and why you decided to or found yourself specializing in EdTech investments of all things.
So I've been at Prosus and Naspers now for over 4 years. And I started, having come from investment banking background, I started in the group M&A and investments department. So I've been more of a generalist, although always focused on the technology space, but I haven't specialized more narrowly at that point. And having spent a few years doing sort of M&A and investments for the broader Prosus and Naspers universe, I decided that it would be interesting to, double click on one of the large verticals that Prosus and Naspers has been investing behind and become, more of a specialized expert in that area. And EdTech was, frankly, a natural choice. It's one of the youngest, if not the youngest, segments that Naspers and Prosus have strategic interest in. And it is still very early in its development. Naspers and Prosus have been lucky to observe over the years how verticals within technology and internet start up and then grow and then become, an established part of the day-to-day life over the years. And EdTech, I feel, is still at the beginning of that path. And therefore, I saw a lot of exciting developments in the industry to come over the years. And hence, it was really interesting for me to explore that area deeper.
And also, if we think about it, EdTech and its uptake was really not widely taken up until really the pandemic. The pandemic was this massive catalyst for the growth of the sector and a really positive catalyst for education technology. Many companies just found their raison d'etre during this time, and then there was all this potential for growth and so much capital that was being raised and invested. I'd love to hear your take on the impact of the pandemic.
The pandemic clearly was a game changer in many ways for the education technology landscape, and companies have, of course, existed pre-pandemic that have been pretty big and successful. But I would say there have been a couple of areas where EdTech has not fulfilled its potential pre-pandemic. There hasn't been a widespread consumer acceptance of the fact that it is possible to get high quality education online, right? So that has not been an established fact yet by any means. Parents in most geographies still sort of strongly prefer to have an offline experience for their children, and the online content almost was considered as at best supplementary but in no way a substitute for the real thing, right? And on the other hand, investors, apart from a few notable exceptions, have not yet made good money in edtech, right? And both of these have combined to kind of make edtech something, that everyone agreed was super promising, but something that hasn't yet arrived, right? And the pandemic has really changed that mindset. It has really caused a pretty substantial shift of that mindset because parents on one end, parents and frankly corporates, they had no alternative suddenly overnight. They had no alternative but to offer training and tutoring and content to their children or employees through online means. Companies that have historically been focused on maybe at best a blend of companies on the education supply front, I mean, that have been focusing historically at best on a blend of online and offline, they had to again overnight really transition to a purely online offering for which they needed to make some very rapid investments. Usage of these online services has just skyrocketed, and that has changed the view of people, and we feel it changed the view of people irreversibly, right? So we're not going back to the pre-pandemic days in terms of that mindset. Everyone understood that often online is a more efficient way of delivering content, right? And it allows for much more personalization. It allows for much more, tailoring of content to the needs of, a specific learner group, etc. It's just logistically often more efficient. We're investors in a company called Go Student, which is connecting students to tutors, mostly out of Europe, school age, typically children. And if you think about it, an offline tutor needs to travel to your home as a parent. Let's say they need to spend an hour there and then travel back, and they need to get paid for all that time. If now suddenly they can fill their schedule in a much more efficient way through online, maybe they can even do it for a lower price for the consumer. And for the consumer, it's also more convenient. So that realization has come for sure, right?
Right.
Now,
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, I remember my kids were taking online piano lessons, and I was like, "How on earth is that going to work?" The piano teachers figured it out. I mean, teaching an instrument online actually happened, something that was completely unfathomable before. If you'd said to a parent, "Yeah, we're gonna teach your kids an instrument, and we're not going to actually, it's not going to be in person," they would have thought you were bonkers. But it happened very effectively. And then after that, I was like, now I've got to get in my car and schlep across town in LA to go take my kids for a piano lesson. I don't really feel like doing that anymore.
exactly.
So yeah, and so it's stuck.
It's stuck. And then if you look at the sort of metrics of usage that all major online platforms have seen, it all skyrocketed, of course, during the pandemic. And then the interesting question that we're now asking ourselves is what's the new normal in the post-pandemic world? And now the picture is crystallizing to some extent as the restrictions have been lifted in most geographies. And I think I would say there's been a broader, bifurcation on the B2C side. The tailwind of the pandemic has been tremendous in a lot of cases, right? And then in most instances, there's been some sort of a reversion to the growth trend that has been there pre the pandemic, right? So there's been a strong boost, and then there's been maybe either a bit of a decline or maybe a plateau, but there is some slowdown if you look at year-on-year metrics. Let's say this year versus the pandemic restriction periods, there is somewhat of a slowdown, although of a higher base, right? So overall, the pandemic has definitely increased the user base, but now the growth isn't obviously as meteorical anymore as the restrictions get lifted.
And can I ask you a question? How do investors feel about that? Because a lot of capital gets raised on these big growth projections. And the reality is you can't keep growing at that pace year after year. And there was this massive boost at the pandemic out of necessity. And now it's just logical that things would not necessarily plateau, but grow at a much more moderate pace. And how do investors, Did you build that into the model, or how do they feel about it?
So I think here, there's an interesting overlap between two impacts. One is the COVID boost, and then let's say normalization, right? Which frankly people have been capturing. I would say, like, no one expected that this will be just now this exponential growth forever. But then it also, of course, overlapped with the financial and macro headwinds that we're now experiencing. Because if you look at it, 2021, which has been maybe the last year of where pandemic restrictions were still in full force, was also a year where there's been sort of incredible monetary monetary easing and all this stimulus issued by governments that's going to cause a huge amount of liquidity. And then 2022 has been a year where the realization came in that this causes inflation, right? Interest rates started to increase. It's very difficult to say what impact is really causing what, because there's like a couple of impacts. One is specifically related to the COVID tailwinds for the industry. The other one is related to the broader macro and financial landscape, I would say. But I think across the tech spectrum, definitely there is a normalization of expectations occurring, right? As the macro environment is now much less favorable, there's much less tailwinds from things like quantitative easing. Overall, tech investors are becoming much more sober, I would say, about what can a company really achieve in this environment.
And so if you have to comment on the sort of the pandemic aftermath, the little bit of the hangover after the big party that the entire ecosystem has been enjoying with lots of promise and hope, but surely some certainly realization that this could not possibly go on forever. What are you seeing now in the aftermath of the big growth phase?
There's definitely more realism, right? That, perhaps some investors sort of spurred on by the combination of COVID tailwinds as well as this sort of favorable macro environment have maybe been a little bit too enthusiastic, let's say, in the year of 2021.
Listen, we love investor enthusiasm, right? I mean, we're happy with that.
We're happy with that, but sometimes it causes things like, overheated valuations in the market, and that at some point become unrealistic and unsustainable. Definite correction in the market since then, and it's been across all tech, and tech has not been insulated from that by any means. All tech names are, if you look at even the public markets, are substantially down since their 2021 peaks. And now I think there is a discovery process of what is really the new normal growth level, what is really the new profitability potential in the post-pandemic world. And, frankly, some companies are doing better than others. I mean, in our portfolio, we are pretty happy with how the companies have been managing this transition. And our portfolio is very broad, right? So it covers both B2B as well as B2C focus names. It covers K-12 focus names and professional focus names. So we have a pretty broad lens on the development of the edtech space, the headwinds, the tailwinds. And I'd say sort of we're guiding our companies now to, as I'm sure everyone or most investors are, to really look forward and, aim to balance solid growth with healthy profitability or healthy path to profitability. That has definitely always been the focus, but I would say the balance shifted significantly from sort of growth, which we've seen in 2021, to more like, grow but sustainably and profitably. And that is very true for edtech. That's also true for other areas of tech, I think.
Completely. Yeah, no, that's just across the board. All of a sudden, the P word made a re-emergence. Like, actually, we're in this to make some profit. Just remember that. So that became sort of front and center, certainly, over the last year. Okay, let's switch and talk about AI, and particularly ChatGPT, which is just, it seems like it's dominating every single conversation that I have right now, regardless of industry, regardless of context. ChatGPT and Bard obviously made its sort of half appearance a couple of weeks ago, and keen to hear your thoughts on the impact of these tools.
So it's fascinating, frankly, and this is something we talk about all the time now. we have a sizable AI team at Prosus and Naspers that work with all our portfolio companies and have been doing that for years now to to develop ways to use AI and AI-driven tools in the businesses that the companies are in. And we have a pretty early lens on what these tools can do, right? And we have been experimenting and implementing some of those tools kind of well ahead of the recent explosion of interest that has been spurred on by the ChatGPT becoming sort of a publicly available tool. But I would say that edtech as a sector has generally been punching significantly below its weight in terms of using and leveraging AI, right? I remember we did a bit of a sort of thought exercise. In which segment the potential for AI use is the highest across all the segments we're playing in, and where the gap between the actual use and the potential is the highest. And edtech was firmly on top, right? That the potential is huge, but also the extent to which companies were leveraging it was until recently pretty limited. And I think the potential is truly tremendous because personalization is something that is the holy grail in edtech. Everyone is trying to achieve maximum personalization to enable the learner to follow a very unique path rather than a boilerplate sort of template that is good for some but not really suitable for others. And machine learning and AI can really help with that. And I feel like now this explosion of interest is making every edtech CEO scratch their head, and if they haven't already been firmly on this journey, to really think, how can I make this part of my offering? So because this will impact everything, starting from K-12 all the way to professional, and problems are multifaceted, right? On one side, there's a question of maybe certain ways of learning and testing might be gone, right? Or might be much more challenging, like essay writing.
I mean, the essay itself as a learning measure or tool, it's having an existential crisis right now, because the amount of kids at all levels of schooling and certainly higher ed that are already leveraging ChatGPT to at least provide the base of an essay. I'm not sure what the numbers are now, but they're increasing on a daily basis.
Exactly. So that's on one hand. On the other end, there is a question of how this will impact the teachers, right? Because to some, like, even in current shape, ChatGPT can maybe act as a teaching assistant in some instances, right? But maybe with the next iterations, it could even in some instances act as a teacher, and who knows what that leads to. Now, on the other end, we have some limited historical precedents that maybe give a little bit more reason for optimism on that front, because look, if you look at the calculator, right? The calculator, once it appeared, it kind of, one could have said it would invalidate all ways of assessment related to mind maths. But then, the schools adapted. Now they have tests where you can use a calculator, and they're just testing higher level skills. And it may be that something similar eventually happens here, where writing a basic essay without original thought would be considered table stakes, because you can use tools like ChatGPT for that. But the tests will actually focus on ability to innovate and engage in more creative thinking. So it's ultimately very exciting, and we're at the very early days of this. But one thing that's clear, I think, is that this is just not going to go away. I mean, this has arrived, and it's only going to get better.
A colleague and friend who's in the work of futurism has said the AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now. It's only getting better. So, in fact, what I've just played some games with for myself is I usually write a bio and intro on my guests, and either I get it online or I ask somebody to send me a bio, but I've just ask ChatGPT, Denis Nikolaev, I need a bio. Anyway, ChatGPT thinks you're someone else, just to let you know. So fortunately, I verified that. But in a little while, the errors that are coming up are going to be erased, and it's going to be the most incredible tool. But yeah, definitely confounding a lot of stakeholders in every ecosystem are trying to figure out what the impact and opportunity is. But I'm glad to hear it's so exciting and that the edtech sector really not yet fully developed in terms of what those opportunities could be. I think that the most exciting part of your job must be getting access to the cutting edge innovation, all the new things that are happening in a sector, which is always interesting and exciting to me. Okay, AI is here, and we know that that's going to only get better and evolve. But what's new and innovative in your space?
There are a few areas that we're excited to follow over the coming months and years to see where that leads to. This is in no particular order, but I'll just kind of give you a few snapshots of some exciting stuff that we're seeing. So one area which actually I think will be a very interesting complement to the use of artificial intelligence and AI in education is collaborative learning, right? So it's learning which is sort of, to some extent at least, focused on the social element of it. So students learning side by side, helping each other, and something that's been occurring in classrooms for decades, obviously. And is there a way to, in a smart and scalable way, move that online? And there are a few exciting companies that are working on that. And it feels like in a world where AI plays a more significant role as an educator, right, having that social connection with a peer would be actually quite valuable and would not go away at all. So social learning and leveraging your peers rather than a centralized teacher figure for clarifying things, making mistakes, jointly figuring them out. This is something which I think is quite interesting to observe.
Yeah, well, I can vouch for that. I mean, I don't know if you have kids or teenagers. I've got two teenagers, and they literally are online with one another whilst they're doing their homework, and they don't even talk to each other from time to time, or they do. They have these like kind of coexisting study groups that are a bit informal, but that's how they learn, and they've been doing this since the pandemic. It's a natural way for them to engage.
It's very natural, and if a right platform offers the right tools for that, the growth can be quite significant, right? And we've seen this in a few geographies now. The other area which is pretty interesting and promising is, I would say, and now it's a little out of vogue, but I think at some point it will make a comeback, is the whole VR, AR, metaverse thing, right? And I've read an article that I think metaverse as a term has declined in popularity over the last year, like 80% or something like that. So it's definitely out of vogue, and I think Meta and their humongous spend in that area didn't sort of make investors any more cheerful on that front. But at some point, my personal view is that this will arrive, right? That moment just hasn't happened yet, and many companies, many exciting and good minds are working on creating a learning metaverse, right? And I'm a parent as well, and my 12-year-old daughter, all she wants to do in her spare time is be on Roblox, right? And Roblox is arguably the best and most widespread metaverse in existence today. Like, a lot of companies are struggling with a huge prize of creating a Roblox for learning, and something which is cool, interactive, allows children to take on cool avatars, yet also helps with their learning objectives, right? And several companies are trying to build something like that, including big tech as well as new, smaller tech innovators. It feels like there should be something there, but that is probably a longer term horizon. Because at the moment, it feels like there's a bit of a metaverse winter for a few years, maybe.
Okay. I'm wondering though, because it does seem like there's still a lot of bubbling under the surface around VR and AR. It seems like a natural next step for learning. I wonder about that time horizon. Maybe just AI in the form of ChatGPT to the consumer just like landed suddenly, but it's been just going on in the background. It's not for a while already. I actually read an article. It was produced by A16Z on all of the different AI entities, tools, companies that are around that we just don't necessarily know about as consumers, but they're there, they've landed, they're in development, they're growing. The next steps regarding AR, VR, I think we'll speak in a sooner time than a few years and go, wow, that happens. That happens sooner than expected, or maybe not. Denis, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have an amazing year of investing, and I hope your portfolio companies continue to grow and thrive. And we'll speak again and see if your predictions have come true in the investing world.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for hanging around all the way to the end. It would mean the world if you would rate and review on Work and Revolution on your favorite listening app. It helps people know that the show is worth listening to, and so I'll really appreciate that. Thank you so much.